Welcome back to the library, Wonder. It's been quite some time, and I hope you've been doing well. Now that you're back, you head over to the first wing, over to the hidden nest, King Shash's shelf, and pick up where you were at last. The first book you see is titled Sword of Galu. The grammar doesn't appear to be the best, so I wouldn't blame you if you had skipped it. But we shall be reading. Sword of Galu. They had set out from the wooden ruins. Heading towards the center of the island, Kane and Roland walked in front, for somehow they had become the leader of this group. Every noise made Kane point his spear at the source of the sound. Most of the time, the sounds came from the birds in the trees, the small creatures running away from them, and the rustling of the trees from the wind. And for the remaining times, the sounds came from a snapping twig that someone had stepped on. Every time that happened, Kane would twist around and shout at the person. It was not only him, though. Everyone seemed a bit wary of every noise in the forest, so they could accept Kane's manner. Travis and Oliver were the worst off, though. The noises made them twitchy and jump. Only one sound did not make the group uncomfortable. That was the sound of water trickling over beds of smooth rock. Kaylin was the first to hear this. "Listen, I hear water." When she said that, everyone stopped and listened, including Roland. He had become excited when he heard sound of water falling onto rock. When she said that, everyone stopped and listened, including Roland. He became excited when he heard the sound of water falling on rock. His throat was dry and parched. He had not drank anything since he had woken. The only source of liquid was the leaves on trees, which tastes horrible and does not provide the satisfaction of cool water flowing onto the throat. After a while of searching, they finally found the source of the refreshing sound. It was a small stream of water flowing downwards like a waterfall. Roland charged towards the stream and knelt down. He cupped his hands and threw water into his mouth. The water was like the long-awaited during a drought. As the coolness trickled down throat, his mind seemed to clear. Roland strolled to Kane after both of them had their fill. Kane saw Roland coming towards him. "We will walk along the stream until we reach the mountains." "And what will happen after?" asked Roland. "The mountains are blocking us from reaching the center." "We will worry about that when we get there. Right now, we have to worry about surviving the night. Send a few people to gather some wood." Roland turned towards the others, who were sitting by the shore of the stream. "Jesse and Leslie, prepare the camp." He paused. "Lucas, Oliver, Teresa, and Kaylin, please gather some wood." The group disappeared into the forest. Nightfall came when the four of them returned back to camp. They piled a portion of the wood in the center of the pit as John tried to light a fire. When the night was dark, Leslie helped him make the fire. After a moment, a roaring flame was lit. The fire was bright, yet the darkness of the forest seemed to absorb the light. The firelight only lit the closest of the trees. Kaylin and Teresa had collected a mango for each of the remaining 12 people. At first, Roland was confused at how to unpeel the fruit without a knife. This mystery was solved when Travis used his teeth and bit into the mango. As the juice dribbled down his chin, Travis exclaimed, "This is the best mango I've ever had." So, when Roland saw this method of eating mango, he dashed to the stream and cleaned the dirt off the mango, and then he bit into the mango's leathery skin. Juice squirted out and onto his face. The pulp seemed to explode with sweetness in his mouth. Only after he ate his first bite of mango did he realize how hungry he was. After they finished their mangoes and washed off in the stream, everyone was in a good mood. He leaned against the age-worn tree and sighed, for the first time since he had woken up on the island. He felt relaxed. The warmth from the fire, combined with the good food and water in his stomach, was pure bliss. Roland said to Kane, "These mangoes truly are good, aren't they?" While staring into the fire, Kane responded, "Yes, and another mystery this island had given us. These fruits are beyond good." Kane got up from his tree and walked towards the stream for a drink of water, yet, on his way he paused, his body tense. "Listen." All conversation around the fire ceased, and everyone heard what made Kane tense. The whisperings were back. The voices had surrounded the group. Everyone got as close to the fire as possible. Kane raised his spear, but dropped it when the dark smoke gathered on the forest floor. From the darkness of the forest, a shadow materialized. A pale mask glowed under the hood of its cloak of void. Roland could not see any weapons of the shadow, yet it had a greater weapon, as if it was a force of nature. Though, as the being came closer, Roland could see a gleam of silver under the shadowy cloak. Roland's gaze fell on the person closest to the shadow, Leslie. She crawled backward, but her back was almost touching the flames and she could go no further. Everyone around her crawled away, not wanting to get between the predator and its prey. Roland was paralyzed with fear. Then it happened. Faster than what Roland's mind could comprehend, a silver blur came from its cloak, and without a sound, Leslie fell. The shadow turned its attention to Kane. It moved with a surprising speed towards him, and a shine of silver came from its cloak. Just as the shadow was about to slay Kane, a flash of light enveloped him. When the light cleared, Kane's breath was heavy, and the shadow being was nowhere to be seen. It was only then could Roland move and breathe again. Roland stumbled towards Kane and checks on him. The shadow did not seem to have done any major damage to him. Kane was shaking, staring at Leslie's body. He said, "It's going to pick us off one by one." Kane turned his head towards Roland. "We must get to the center as quickly as possible. Every night we delay means someone dies." Travis, who had been next to Kane at the moment, said, "Maybe that dream we all had was a lure for us." "No, I highly doubt that. The figure that appeared in the dreams was glowing with golden light, the same light that caused the shadow to flee. I think the deity is trying to help us." Jumping to his feet, Travis said, "If the deity is trying to help us, he wouldn't have brought us to this island." "We have no way to confirm that the deity brought us here." Travis shook his head and sighed. With a glance at the forest, Travis sulked to the fire and took a seat there. Kane took a sad look at Travis. I can't blame it on him. He had no mental preparation of the shadow attack. It just came so suddenly for him. Then he nodded towards Oliver. "He is probably in the same distress as Travis, but he is much more silent on matters." The two of them looked at Isabel, who was sitting next to Oliver and comforting him. "It's strange how we somehow form bonds between each other. It's the only way we are going to survive." He picked up his spear and went towards the stream. Roland took a deep sigh and went to where Kalen and Teresa huddled together. They were on the other side of the fire towards the stream, so the view they had of the shadow wasn't clear. It was clear that they were trying to avoid the body that laid on the other side of the fire. As Roland came towards them, Kalen raised an eyebrow. "This place is strange, isn't it? I have never actually believed in ghosts or anything related to them, yet now..." She leaned back. I still don't believe in them. From what I can tell, everything that happened on this island is not actually ghosts, but on this island. She shook her head. Teresa whispered, and her arms around Caitlin tightened. Caitlin looked at her. Poor Teresa. Look at what this place has done to her. She glanced at the body. Look at what this place has done to all of us. This place is evil. I can feel it. As the fire dwindled, John threw more wood onto the fire. The boy kept glancing at Leslie's corpse. When the fire was restored, he knelt down and clasped her hands. He started to whisper a prayer. Teresa watched as he did so, and tears streamed down from her eyes. Caitlin brought her closer. That night was another sleepless night for all of them. In the morning, they started once again towards the mountains. Since no one wanted to touch Leslie's body, they left it there, exposed. Roland knew it was wrong, but he could not manage to bring himself to bury it. Once again, Kane and Roland walked in front. Everyone was silent after what had happened last night. The only sound was the water on stone. Occasionally, the group stopped and took a drink from the water. Yet, this break was quick, and they resumed walking almost as soon as they had stopped. The trees cast a shade that protected them from the sun. But that was not enough to cool them. Sweat rolled down Roland's neck and into his shirt. Everyone's clothing was soaking wet. The entire group was miserable as they walked. Only the water could provide a temporary shelter and relief from the hot day. It was noon when they reached the lake that the spring had originated from. Kane squinted at the mountains. Strange. Another mystery. What mystery? Roland asked. The last time we stopped, the mountains were still very far away, but look at it now. It seems we are already at the foot of the mountains. Shading his eyes with his hand, Roland gazed at the mountains. I have to agree. Our pace was slow. There's no way we could have reached the mountains that quickly. Kane turned to the group and said, We will rest here, but only for a moment. I want to reach the mountains before nightfall. Roland went to the spring of water and gulped a few handfuls of it. He then came to where Caitlin was deep in conversation with Lucas. They seemed to be talking about how close the mountains were. Lucas noticed Roland approaching them and smiled. This island is mysterious, I have to say. It is quite exhilarating. He frowned, though Leslie and David's demise was tragic. Roland found Lucas to be dreamy and eccentric. There was an air of tranquility around him. His appearance was beautiful, yet not as unearthly as after he became the Deus. Indeed, said Roland. What do you think that shadow ghost could be? Lucas thought for a moment. Ancient beyond words, I suppose. From what I could tell, the deity and the shadows are opponents. Kalen nodded. Makes sense. After all, every time that there is a bright flash of light, the shadow goes away. Maybe the deity sent that light to protect us. Then why did Leslie and David die? Asked Roland. After he said that, Teresa walked towards them. She was still shaking from last night's encounter. Caitlin embraced her. Lucas observed this and said, I think the greatest ability of the shadow is its ability to manipulate emotions. Caitlin tilted her head and thought for a moment. I agree. Maybe it is trying to doubt the deity? From the spring of water, Kane shouted. We are continuing. The group gathered and continued on their way. Only after a moment did they finally reach the foot of the mountains. The mountains were a tall barrier from the center of the island. Roland had to strain his neck to see the peaks of the mountains. Kane turned to Roland and said, "How are we going to get over the mountain?" With a shrug, Roland responded, "Maybe we could find if there is a passage through the mountains." Lucas came up to them. When Kane saw him, his eyes narrowed. Ignoring him, Lucas said, "If there are people on this island, maybe they made a tunnel to the center." "Perhaps," Roland said after thinking for a while. "I don't think so." Kane shook his head. "If they had miners and tunnels, then why are their villages made of wood?" Lucas shrugged. "Just a suggestion." He walked away. As he walked, Kane glared at him. "Lucas is the one who brought us to the island. I know it." "He woke up just like everyone else," replied Roland. "Didn't you hear his conversation with Kalen? He believes that we are here for a reason." He pointed a finger at the ground. "Who would wake up on an island, see people get killed, and believe they are there for a reason?" "I mean, he is a bit strange, but that doesn't mean he brought us here." Kane put a hand on Roland's shoulder. "I want you to keep Lucas under watch. I don't think he is who he says he is." "Fine, I'll keep watch on him." An orange glare was cast upon the mountains from the setting sun. From the slope of the mountains, a fire roared and crackled. Everyone gathered around it except for Kane, who was guarding with his wooden spear. Roland found himself frequently glancing at the forest like everyone else. As the night went on, the whispers were silent and the black smoke did not gather. Roland was waiting for the shadow to come. Some of them had somehow fallen asleep. He himself was also tired, but the approaching danger of the shadow made him stay awake. In the end, Roland fell asleep. The sun was only on its verge of rising when Roland woke. Kane was the only other one that was awake. He had kept watch for the entire night. Roland jumped to his feet and looked at everyone else who was asleep on the ground. He couldn't see who was dead, who wasn't. Kane walked over to him and said, "Don't worry, the shadow didn't come." Roland took a sigh of relief and went around to wake everyone up. After everyone was awake, Roland went to Kane and asked, "Which direction should we go?" "Westward, perhaps," Kane replied. Roland shook his head. "I think we should go east. Remember when we found those ruins in the east and the deity came?" "I mean, we are lost regardless. East then." They began walking along the mountains. Above, the sky was covered with gray clouds. From afar, the sound of thunder and the flashing of light came. Wind began to quicken and turned colder. Kane saw and recognized these signs of a storm and said to Roland, "We need to find some shelter, perhaps a cave. We could probably die from the cold." Just as he said that, a drop of rain fell onto Roland's head. This drop was followed by another until the air around them was solid with rain. Everyone broke into a sprint, hoping to reach a cave somewhere around the foot of the mountain. Thunder was closer now, as if they could feel its power as the lightning flashed towards the ground. From behind, someone slipped and fell with a shout. No one went to help them. From ahead, Kane pointed into the mist that rose from the ground. "A cave! There!" he shouted. Roland ran with renewed vigor. Finally, he could see a faint lineament of the cave through the fog, and it was only a moment before he passed into shelter of stone and rock. As he wandered the cave, he found that it went deep into the mountain. An orange glow was cast upon the walls as John made a fire. After his quick exploration, Roland went to join the others. "The cave goes deep," he said, and he sat down on a boulder. I don't know what lies at the end of it, but it might be a tunnel to the other side of this mountain. No, Kane shook his head. It's too dangerous. We don't know what lies in the darkness. He glanced at the darkness that lay before the true depths of the cave. What if this is where the shadow ghost resides? There's too much risk. But if there is a possibility of an exit to the other side of the mountain, then the risk is worth it. Kalen stood up. Within the light of the fire, she looked powerful and brave. Her twinkling eyes were determined. What if we formed a small group to explore the cave? I'll go with Roland. Just as she finished her declaration, a dark silhouette appeared at the opening of the cave. Kane readied his spear, but as the figure came to the firelight, its face was revealed. It was Isabella, who had fell down in the rain. Shivering, she came to the fire and sat down. There was silence for a moment before Lucas stood up as well. I'll go as well, he said. Kane narrowed his eyes as Lucas said that, but as usual, Lucas ignored his glare and came to Kalen's side. Charlotte also stood up. As she did so, Diana reached towards the girl's hand. When Charlotte saw this gesture, she said, "It's okay. I'll go as well. I want to go as well, please." Diana's eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. If it's okay, let me go with you. Fine, she sighed. The moment Charlotte said that, Diana jumped up from her rock, and the two of them came to Roland's side. Kane regarded the group with a raised eyebrow and said, I believe that is enough for an exploration. We can't have more than half of us go running into a dark cave. We need to stay together in order to survive. You have to get back before the storm ends, or else we're gonna go without you. With the warning said, the five of them began their walk deeper into the cave. After a few steps, Roland looked back and saw the light from the fire had faded into the shadows. All was covered in a layer of darkness, and the only light was the torch in Roland's hand. After a while of walking, the torch burned out, and darkness fell upon them once again. Fortunately, everyone each carried 2 pieces of wood that could be used as a torch. However, by the pace the torch died out, it would be soon before all the torches were used up. At first they walked in silence, but after the first torch died, conversations began. Diana was the first to speak. The ground is sloping downward. Indeed, that was the case. Although the slope was not noticeable at first, it began to become steeper as it went on. Maybe the ground level on the other side of the mountains is lower. Kalen shrugged. Lucas said, I don't think that this tunnel leads to the other side of the mountain. Diana stopped walking. Then why are we going down the tunnel anyways? If it leads to nothing, then we should head back and avoid being killed by some monster. I never said that there was nothing down the tunnel. I just said that it doesn't lead into the mountains. Yes, there is something down there, a monster, that is all too happy to devour us. Diana's voice echoed through the tunnel. Roland noticed that the tunnel's walls were becoming more narrow as they walked deeper into the cave. Kalen asked, Lucas, how do you know that? I don't really know. It's a feeling. Like how you recall something that didn't actually happen. You know that feeling? Lucas frowned. Yes, so that is what you're feeling? Indeed. It feels like I have been down here before, said Lucas. Roland shivered as he glanced at Lucas. At that moment, he believed that Lucas truly was the one who had brought them to the island. The tunnel bent right. When they turned the corner, the ground was even steeper. Diana's mouth was wide as she looked at the darkness. Roland noticed this and said, If you want to go back, then I will not force you. Diana glanced at Charlotte, who nodded. Charlotte lit a torch, and the two of them disappeared through the shadows. Roland turned to his remaining companions and gave them a sad smile. Seeing that his torch was running out, he turned towards the tunnel, and deeper into the mountain they went. As they walked, Roland noticed that the walls were made from stone bricks. "It seems that people came down here before," said Kaylin. "That's usually a good sign." Roland looked at her and smiled. "Maybe these people built these walls here in order to contain a monster." Giggling, Lucas said, "Even if there was a monster, it probably escaped long ago, seeing how old these bricks are." "That makes sense." Kaylin lit another torch after Roland's went out. And Kaylin gasped. Roland squinted his eyes to see what Kaylin was gasping about. The tunnel had ended in a tall stone door. "Well, we've found where this tunnel ends, at least," she breathed. Lucas examined it for a while and said, "How do we open it?" He walked over to the door, put his hands on the stone, and gave it a push. "Someone help me with this." Roland hesitated before walking over to Lucas and putting his hand on the door. As he did so, the door swung open as if on a smooth hinge. Inside was a small chamber, lit by torches on the wall. However, these torches were emerald green. The center of the chamber was a large stone sarcophagus. When the door opened, Kaylin asked, "How are there torches?" Sighing, Roland said, "Mysteries upon mysteries." He walked over to the sarcophagus. The lid was carved with the likeness of a warrior, whose hands rested on his chest. Fast in the warrior's gauntlet's hand was a sword. The sword shone as if it had been forged and polished not even a day ago. Around the sarcophagus were piles of scrolls. The scrolls showed no signs of damage from time. He picked one up and rolled it open. On it were letters that Roland did not recognize. There were also pictures of a soldier fighting. Kaylin walked over to him and said, "What's this?" "I don't know." Roland shook his head. "Maybe a battle?" He rolled the scroll up again and put it back on the floor. There was something else on the floor besides the scrolls. As he looked closer, he saw that it was a sheath. The sound of stone break and metal scratching echoed through the chamber. Roland looked up and saw Lucas, holding up the large sword that the warrior was grasping. The broken stone fingers of the warrior lay on the floor. "This is heavy." Lucas handed it to Roland. What Lucas said was true. The blade was heavier than anything Roland had ever lifted. Only with two hands was he able to hold it properly. Looking back at the sheath, he picked it up. The blade slid smoothly into the sheath. There were two straps on it so that Roland could sling it over his shoulder. "This could be useful," he said. Kaylin looked at the blackened torch in her hand, and then looked at the green torches on the walls. Finally, she threw the stub of wood on the ground and looked. Well, it certainly was an interesting read. I myself am interested in the fantasy behind it more, though I would love for the story to be a little more brushed up on how it's written. But there is another book to read. This one has word on the cover. It's clearly not its title, but it says "You're welcome." So you open it up. The Association of Entities That Never Did Exist. The meeting of Tainde will now come to order. Frederick Starbuck, the protagonist of a sci-fi novel that had all copies destroyed, banged a not gavel on a non-existent podium. The unnamed child will read off the minutes of the last meeting. The unnamed child, a character from a children's book that never existed, stood up. First order of business is the last meeting was celebrated to the passage of Cecil Demuth into the realm of fiction. He was featured as an incidental character in a short story written by a college student. There was some polite applause. Next, we discussed the matter of actively attempting to enter narratives, much the same way young Friedrich did so many years ago. After that, the tentacled mass and President Starbuck debated the merits of cannibalism among Neverwares, and whether it should be banned entirely or encouraged to get rid of threats to the non-existent community. Finally, we voted on whether or not the newest initiate in our group, Talos, should be made a full member. The ayes had it. Welcome, Talos, son of Hermes, god of television. The tentacled mass screeched their approval about finally having another deity in the Foundation. For some reason, despite never speaking, everyone understood it. Talos, a young man with hair fashioned into the style reminiscent of an old rabbit-eared antenna, simply blushed. I'm humbled to be in such an association, really. I'd not heard of Tenedae before I stumbled into the non-room last week.
We're glad to have you here on the Association of Entities That Never Did Exist, Talos.
Ivory Ebony smiled at him, flashing teeth that were half white, half black.
Tell us a little about yourself. The meeting ended before you got a proper introduction.
Well, like the unnamed child, I'm meant to be the son of Hermes, god of communication. I was going to be worshipped by a group of Hermetic revolutionists in New York City, but the leader of the cult died before he could write up anything about me. I've been one of our kind for about 7 Earth years now. Talos sighed and sniffed a bit. I never existed, and I probably never will exist.
And how does that make you feel, Talos?
Starbuck asked. Honestly, pretty damn bitter. It's not fair that my creator died before he got a chance to write a single word about me. Now I'm condemned to wander the ways for the rest of eternity until someone somehow inserts me into a narrative. The tentacled mass screeched. How did I find this place? I just stumbled in here one day and found the meeting in session. It's quite nice here, really, compared to some other parts of the ways.
Well, I'm glad you like it.
Sokarth Har, king of the solar city of Magua and treasurer of Tenedae, smiled at Talos.
How do you like the concept of beverages?
They go quite well with the non-existent donuts, I must say. Everyone in the room chuckled. There were only 10 Neverwhere in the association, some of them humanoid, but most of them were something else. Sokarth Har was a being entirely made out of plasma, and the aforementioned tentacled mass was just that, a tentacled mass dreamt up by either Lovecraft or one of his contemporaries. There was debate over which it was. That had not been committed to paper before the author had died. Anyway, the cult I was meant to be worshipped by, Talos continued, was led by a man named Trevor Sonatia. He became obsessed with Greek mythology, particularly the myths involving Hermes, and he was convinced that Hermes was the only Olympian that had survived into the modern day because, as god of messengers, he was able to thrive on all the communications technology in the modern world.
I nearly met Hermes once.
Everyone in the not room but Talos groaned. Ivory Ebony loved to brag about the mythological beings and famous figures she had almost met.
I saw the back of his head as he came out of the library once.
The bowl of tentacles screeched in response.
It's true, I did.
More screeching from the writhing mass.
Moving on. Shall we recite the oath?
Indeed, Starbuck led the other Neverwares in the Oath of Tenedae. We are ideas without form. We are not much better than chaos. We never were and never will be. We will govern this chaos even if we are not heard. We are the association of entities that never did exist, and we are order amongst the Neverwhere. The first item on the agenda, said the unnamed child, is the fact that an increasingly large amount of members from the group that the library calls the book burners are using the ways and attempting to destroy Neverwares. What shall our course of action be?
We shall now take a short recess.
Starbuck banged the knot gavel, and everyone got up. Ivory started talking to the tentacled mass, who had some less than nice things to say about Ivory. They had started a sort of shouting match when the topic of eldritch deities came up.
Shove it up. Do you even have an ass? If so, shove it up there, hentai brain.
Ivory slapped the mass across what she thought was the face. The unnamed child looked at Ivory. What's hentai? Ivory blinked and cursed to herself. Turning around, she said in a sweet tone.
You're too young to know that, sweetie.
She smiled innocently and patted her on the head. I'm older than you. I've been around since the 1950s. I've just never been published. Don't be patronizing, you bicolored hag.
If you're so old, why don't you...
Calm down.
Starbuck aimed a laser pistol up into the air, if direction such as up could apply here. We are all non-existent here. We're all on equal terms, the bickering continued. Starbuck fired a couple of shots to no effect, and then tried to separate the two bickering non-entities. Talos sat in his chair and sighed, drumming his fingers against the knot table. Why were Neverwhere so petty? He looked around the knot room and... Hello, was that a wall? It was. And it had a gigantic number 4 on it. What on earth? Walking around the commotion, he went up to the wall and tapped on it. Brick came loose, and on the other side he saw... Son of a bitch! Everyone shut up for a second! The bickering continued. I said shut up! It went on. Ivory threw a punch at Sokarth, who had gotten involved due to Starbucks saying something nasty about plasmoid beings, and Talios had to duck under a flying concept of a chair. Finally, at the top of his lungs, Talios bellowed, I may not exist, but I am still a god. I command you all to stop! Everyone stopped, dead in their tracks, and stared at Talios. What is the meaning of this? Asked the unnamed child. Someone is writing about us, or has written about us. The tentacle mass screeched at the not god. I can feel it, and since someone's writing about us... Ivory stared, her jaw dropping. Oh my god, we exist! Maybe you do, said an incidental character in the corner who had not yet been mentioned in the narrative. But I haven't even gotten a name yet. Well, you were just mentioned, so there's that, Talios smiled. Hold on, there are 10 of us. How many of us have been named? Starbucks counted on his fingers. There's me, Ivory, Sokarth, you, the unnamed child, the character in the corner, oh, and Cthulhu's hairball. The tentacled mass screeched. What, it's a name, isn't it? That leaves 3 that still haven't been mentioned in the narrative. Well, it's not like they can do anything, responded the unnamed child. If they attack us, they'll be mentioned in the narrative, and therefore will exist. Ow. The metafiction levels of the story are making my brain hurt. Dial it back a bit, guys.
Screw you, narrator,
shouted the 8th character, plucked from a fanfiction that would never be written. And with good reason, it was quite horrible.
It could have been quality if it hadn't been based off of Doctor Who.
That just leaves me,
expounded a stout gentleman in a boiler hat.
And whoever this 10th is.
Me?
Said the 10th individual.
I know what I am, Neverwhere.
Everyone stared at the 10th individual, who was, quite simply, I can't say he was indescribable, because that means he had a description.
You all are Neverwhere.
Hold on, though. Talios pointed up to the previous line of dialogue. How can you be in Neverwhere if you were mentioned in the story? That just makes you aware. The Neverwhere gave a cry and disappeared in a proof of logic. Starbuck frowned. Well, that settles it, then. Well, we've heard before about the things that do not exist that do exist, and I believe it was Leavings of Another World, HNO2. But today, we've learned about things that wanted to exist, rather than that which did not. But there's one more thing that you believe you could read before the end is up. A love letter. A love letter.
My dearest lover, I write to you knowing this letter may be intercepted by those who keep us apart, but I could not bear it any longer. This distance tears my soul, and your bondage flays my heart. I yearn for the day you come back to me, my darling. I miss you so. From the moment we met in the place beyond words, I knew we were meant to be. Even if the curse of the forest tried its damnedest to keep us apart, we overcame the nameless spell and ventured into the world at large, daring where others did not. By God, our journeys were marvelous. Lands of wonder, unclean, the underworld, and even the library. It was there we swore to serve the serpent, and where we swore our love to one another. Do you remember how they knighted us, and how there was recoil at the blade? It was then that I knew how much I wanted to protect your antlered self from all harm and anything that may come to you, but I failed, and it eats me. I do not know how we can be apart, even now. And then I see a way open, and I see a tortured soul just beyond it, but I see the jailers, and I freeze. But I will recover your beautiful eyes from the clutches of the jailers. I want us to be together forever, and in the end, that was all that ever really mattered. Yours, Alice.
Notes from the writing. I miss you so. Description. The SCP in question is a Servine-headed entity originating from the Silent Forest. The anomaly may not be referred to by any name, title, or designation. Only descriptions may be used when referring to the one from the Silent Forest. Variations must be made in these descriptions each time the subject is described, and florid language may be used for the sake of nomenclative diversity. In addition to its nomenclative anomaly, the unwelcomed guest is capable of minor reality bending, typically manifesting in the form of creating ways leading to an unidentified humanoid entity. None of the ways produced by the attempted escapee have been taken. It is currently unknown whether the ways created lead to a hostile armed force, the land of the nameless, or are simply attempts to escape on behalf of the Servine pest. Do you remember how they knighted us, and how there was recoil at the blade? Special containment procedures. Protocol 4000 Eshnu is to be observed when discussing the prisoner, and, as such, only trained personnel may be assigned to this anomaly. The lost deer is to be restrained using iron shackles at all times, due to the extremely toxic effect of the iron on the little doe. The restraints are to be removed once weekly to ensure its survival. In the event the shackled game attempts to escape during weekly removal, it is to be subdued with the use of Scranton Reality Anchor and personnel equipped with iron gear. And, in the end, object class neutralized. Well, that certainly was an interesting read. It appears that, in addition to something captured by the Foundation, there's something living here, I think in the library. Well, another time we will perhaps get to reading that in the articles, but for now, it is time for us to finish. Your time has been well spent here, I hope. So is mine. Thank you for coming, and good luck out there, Wanderer.